The scream ripped through the usual ER cacophony. Not a patient's wail of pain, but a sharp, metallic shriek of tires, followed by the unmistakable, chilling stutter of automatic gunfire. Dr. Eris Thorne didn't flinch. Not outwardly, anyway. Her hands, nimble and sure, continued their work, resetting the shattered radius of a terrified 7-year-old girl named Lily. Around them, Street Jude's community hospital's emergency room, a perpetually understaffed, poorly lit crucible of urban desperation, plunged into a new, more dangerous chaos. Nurses dove behind reception desks, orderlies wrestled gurneys into makeshift barricades, and the low, collective murmur of anxious patients escalated into frightened cries. "Easy, Lily," Eris murmured, her voice a calm counterpoint to the rising panic. Her gaze, however, flickered towards the reinforced glass doors of the ambulance bay, where the sounds of conflict intensified. Bullets, she imagined, were already carving divots into the asphalt outside. This was East Ward, after all. Another Saturday night, another gang war spilling blood onto the neglected streets. She'd seen it 100 times. But tonight felt different, more visceral, Lily whimpered, her small body trembling. "Mommy, is it bad?" "It's just loud, sweetheart," Eris reassured, securing the splint. "Dr. Eris has got you. You're safe in here." She met the mother's wide, terrified eyes over Lily's head. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. "Are we?" A particularly loud volley of shots, closer this time, rattled the building. The power flickered, plunging the ER into a momentary, heart-stopping darkness before the emergency generators sputtered to life, casting an eerie amber glow. In that brief, terrifying interval, Eris saw it. Through the smoked, reinforced glass of the ambulance bay doors, a tableau of stark horror unfolded. A group of young men, instantly identifiable by the vibrant purple bandanas tied around their arms, the Vipers, were dragging a limp form across the concrete. The wounded man was tall, his frame awkwardly contorted, one hand pressed feebly to his chest. A dark, rapidly expanding stain blossomed across his white t-shirt. He was barely conscious, his head lolling precariously, eyes half-lidded. His friends, their faces contorted with fear and desperation, were pushing him towards the very doors that were now sealed against them. Hospital policy, drilled into every staff member by the meticulous, liability-obsessed hospital administrator, Mr. Davies, was absolute. In an active shooter or gang violence situation, no one enters or leaves until the police declare the scene secure. To do otherwise was to invite unimaginable risk, to turn the hospital into a battleground. Eris felt a cold dread seep into her bones, quickly followed by a familiar, righteous anger. Waiting meant he would die. On their doorstep, he was a Viper, undoubtedly. A gangbanger, as Detective Harding would undoubtedly call him. But right now, he was a dying man, a human being. Her eyes swept across her ER. Nurses, technicians, residents, all of them had families, mortgages, fears. Opening those doors could mean putting them all in harm's way. The policy existed for a reason. Davies would crucify her. Her license, her career, her entire life could go up in smoke. But the Hippocratic oath, etched into her soul, was clearer, louder than any policy or administrator's decree. First, do no harm. Treat the patient in front of you. Dr. Thorne? Nurse Miller, a veteran with steel in her spine but fear in her eyes, stood a few feet away. "What do we do?" Davies said under no circumstances. Eris cut her off, her voice low but piercing, cutting through the remaining tremors of fear in the room. "To hell with policy," she commanded, the words ringing with an almost divine conviction. "He's not a gang member right now. He's a patient. We open the doors." She pushed Lily's mother gently aside, striding purposefully towards the ambulance bay entrance. "Nurse Miller, get Trauma Bay 1 ready. Call for blood, type O negative, call doctor. Chen, tell him to be ready for vascular. And someone get me a GCS on this guy before he's even through the door." Her voice, usually calm and measured, now had an edge of fierce authority. It was the voice of a commander on a battlefield, issuing orders that transcended fear. Two security guards, usually gruff and immovable, hesitated, looking at each other, then at Eris's unyielding gaze. "Now!" she barked, not asking but demanding. Reluctantly, one of the guards moved to the console, punching in the code. A hiss of hydraulics, a soft whir, and the heavy doors slowly, agonizingly, began to slide open. The immediate sound that hit them was deafening. The closer crackle of gunfire, the distant wail of sirens, the desperate shouts of the vipers outside. One of them, a young man with a terrified face, glanced over his shoulder as if expecting a bullet to pierce him any second, then helped shove his wounded comrade through the now open doorway. Eris didn't wait. She moved forward, her own hands reaching out to help pull the dying man into the relative safety of the ER. As she did, she glimpsed the chaotic street scene, flashing blue and red lights approaching, figures scattering into the shadows, and a chilling sight. The Iron Crows, their rival gang, in their signature black and red, were retreating, but not without firing a few last spiteful rounds. One bullet pinged off the concrete pillar just inches from Eris's head as she hauled the heavy weight of the wounded man across the threshold. "Get him on the gurney!" she shouted, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Let's go! Let's go!" They wrestled the limp form onto a waiting trauma gurney. His breathing was shallow, ragged. His eyes, now fully open, were glazed with pain and shock, darting wildly, seeing nothing. His skin was cold and clammy. "GCS-3 doctor, a resident doctor, Elena Rodriguez," reported, her voice trembling but professional. "Pulse thready, BP 70, 40, looks like a GSW to the left chest, probably through and through, massive blood loss. Get him to Trauma 1, Eris ordered, her eyes already scanning for entry and exit wounds. Get those trauma shears, let's get him stripped. Miller, get a central line in fast. Dr. Chen, where are you?" As the team moved with practiced urgency, pulling the gurney deeper into the ER, the heavy doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them once more into their sanctuary. But the sanctuary had been breached, not by the violence outside, but by the conscious, defiant choice of one doctor. Eris looked down at the young man, barely more than a boy, his life draining away onto her pristine white sheets. His face was etched with a raw terror that transcended any gang affiliation. He was just a patient, and she would fight like hell to keep him alive. The fight, she knew, had only just begun. The air in Trauma Bay 1 was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the crackle of focused energy. Eris Thorne, her face beaded with sweat, her usually pristine scrubs now splattered, worked with a furious intensity. The young man Leo, as his friends had screamed his name before vanishing into the night, was barely clinging to life. His left lung was collapsing, and they suspected a major vessel had been severed. "He's coding!" Dr. Rodriguez yelled, her voice strained. "Pressure dropping!" "He's not coding on my watch!" Eris roared back, already tearing open a thoracotomy kit. "Miller, another unit of O-neg! Chen, get that chest open now!" With a swift, decisive incision, Dr. Chen, a usually unflappable thoracic surgeon who had arrived just in time, cut through skin and muscle. The sight was grisly: a collapsed lung, a ragged hole, and a gush of dark, venous blood that painted the surgical field crimson. It was at this precise, critical juncture, amidst the desperate struggle for a human life, that the doors to Trauma Bay 1 burst open. "What in God's name is going on here, Dr. Thorne?" The voice, shrill and utterly devoid of empathy, belonged to Mr. Davies, the hospital administrator. He stood framed in the doorway, a trim man in an expensive suit, his face a mask of furious indignation. His eyes, however, weren't on the dying patient, but on the potential for lawsuits, for bad press, for anything that might upset the delicate financial balance of Street Jude's. "Get out, Mr. Davies," Eris snapped, her head not even lifting from the patient. "We are in the middle of a life-saving procedure." "Life-saving?" Davies shrieked, advancing into the bay, oblivious to the sterile field he was contaminating. "You opened the doors during an active gang war? Do you have any idea the liability you've exposed this hospital to? The police are here, demanding answers, and you're here saving some street thug?" He gestured wildly at Leo, his disgust palpable. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his contempt for human life, his complete dismissal of the Hippocratic Oath, sent a surge of hot, incandescent rage through Eris. They were literally cracking a man's chest open to prevent his death, and this corporate parasite was screaming about insurance premiums. "I said get out!" Eris's voice was low, dangerous, a growl. "You want to talk about liability, Mr. Davies? Let this man die on my table because I followed your spineless, bureaucratic policy, and then we'll talk about liability. Now, either assist or get the hell out of my ER." Davies, momentarily stunned by her ferocity, actually recoiled. "This isn't over, doctor. You're suspended, officially suspended, pending a full board review." "I'll see to it you never practice medicine again," he stormed out, his threats echoing in the tense silence. Eris didn't spare him a glance. Pressure's still dropping, Chen. What are we seeing? Looks like a lacerated subclavian vein, Chen replied, his brow furrowed with concentration. Massive bleed. I need better access. They worked in a desperate, synchronized ballet against death. The image of Davies's infuriated, uncaring face burned into Eris's mind. The rage she felt fueled her, sharpening her focus. She would save this boy, if only to spite every soulless bureaucrat like Davies. Minutes later, as they finally got the bleed under control, and Leo's blood pressure began its slow, agonizing climb back towards viability, the doors to Trauma Bay 1 opened again. This time, it was Detective Harding. He was a grizzled man, late 50s, with a perpetual scowl etched into his face and eyes that had seen too much urban decay. He wore a rumpled suit, his police badge prominently displayed. Behind him stood two uniformed officers, their hands resting on their holsters, their gazes sweeping the room with suspicion. Dr. Thorne, Harding's voice was a low growl, devoid of any pleasantries. I've been told you have a suspect in here. Name of Leo Valdez, member of the Vipers. We have a warrant for his arrest. Eris turned, her face grim. Her hands, still gloved and bloody, were resting on Leo's chest. Detective, this suspect is a critically injured patient. He's just come off bypass, he has massive internal injuries, and he's barely stable. He is in no condition to be questioned, let alone arrested. Harding stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. He's a criminal, doctor. Got himself into a gang fight? Got shot? Frankly, he got what was coming to him. You're obstructing a police investigation by even touching him. He looked at Leo with undisguised contempt. Should have let him bleed out on the street. Save the city some paperwork. The comment, so utterly devoid of humanity, made Eris's blood run cold. This was the second time tonight that a man in authority had suggested, explicitly or implicitly, that a human life was disposable. My duty, detective, Eris said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury, is to save lives, period. Your duty is to uphold the law, and I suggest you do that outside this trauma bay. This man is under my care, and that care is protected by doctor-patient confidentiality. He is a patient, not a perp, until he is stable enough to be transferred or questioned. Harding's jaw clenched. You're telling me you're protecting a gang member? A viper? You know what these animals do to our streets? To innocent people? He pointed a finger at Leo. This patient of yours has a rap sheet longer than my arm. He's probably shot half a dozen people himself. I don't care about his rap sheet, detective, Eris retorted, her voice rising. I care about his pulse, his breathing, his brain activity. He's a human being, and he is dying. I treat him. That is what I do. The air crackled with hostility. Harding looked like he was about to explode. You're going to regret this, doctor. You're aiding and abetting. I can have you arrested right here, right now. Then do it, Eris challenged, stepping forward, practically daring him. Arrest me, but it won't change the fact that this man needs medical care, and I will continue to provide it until I am physically stopped. Now, if you want to question him, you can wait in the hall until he is stable, and I mean stable, not awake enough to grumble. Harding glared at her, his face a thundercloud. He looked like he wanted nothing more than to drag her out of the room, but he was bound by procedure too, however much he hated it. He knew he couldn't physically interfere with a life-saving medical procedure without risking a massive scandal and a lawsuit. With a disgusted huff, he turned to his officers. Stay outside. No one in, no one out, without my say-so. He cast one last withering look at Eris, then stomped out of the trauma bay, the doors hissing shut behind him. The silence he left behind was heavy, but also, strangely, a relief. Eris looked back at Leo. He was alive. Still critical, still teetering on the edge, but alive. Let's get him to the ICU, Eris said, her voice now hoarse with exhaustion and the lingering adrenaline. Dr. Rodriguez, I want you to monitor him every 15 minutes. Full neurochecks. Any change, you call me immediately, even if I'm asleep. Miller, make sure his room is completely sterile. No visitors. Police only with my explicit permission. Understood? Her team nodded, weary but resolute. They had faced down both corporate callousness and legalistic cruelty. They had saved a life, and for now, that was all that mattered. As Leo was carefully wheeled out of Trauma Bay 1, Eris caught sight of the official notice tucked into her locker in the changing room. It was from Mr. Davies, short and to the point. Official suspension pending board review. She crumpled it in her fist, then tossed it into the bin. Her eyes, tired but fierce, remained fixed on the retreating gurney. They could suspend her, threaten her, revile her, but they couldn't undo what she had done. Leo Valdez was alive, and she had done her job. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, a fitting mood for the oppressive tension that hung over Street Jude's. Leo Valdez was stable, but still intubated and unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by a heavy police presence. Detective Harding had made good on his word. 2 uniformed officers stood sentinel outside Leo's room, their stern faces reflecting the department's resolve. Eris, despite her suspension, had refused to leave the hospital. She was reviewing charts, making rounds, essentially performing her duties, daring Mr. Davies to physically escort her out. He hadn't. Yet. The hospital buzzed with rumors, fear, and a strange, almost defiant pride among some of the nurses and residents. They'd saved Leo. They'd stood up to Davies and Harding. Just after lunch, an unexpected visitor arrived. He didn't come through the ambulance bay, nor did he present himself at the main reception. He simply appeared. A security guard, looking utterly bewildered, escorted him to the nurse's station, his eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and awe. The man was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, a pristine white shirt, and a silk tie. His hair was slicked back, revealing a sharp, intelligent face. He moved with an effortless grace, his presence commanding attention without a single shouted word. His eyes, dark and piercing, held a chilling stillness. This was Marcus El Serpiente Ramirez, leader of the Vipers, and Leo's older brother. Detective Harding, who had been lingering nearby, was immediately on high alert. He moved to intercept, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "Ramirez," he growled, "you're not allowed on this property without—" El Serpiente barely glanced at him. His gaze was fixed on Nurse Miller. "I understand there is a doctor here. Dr. Eris Thorne. She saved my brother's life." His voice was low, melodic, but carried an undeniable weight. Miller, usually unflappable, swallowed hard. She's around here somewhere." She looked frantically for Eris. Eris, emerging from a supply closet, saw the tableau. Harding, tense and furious, Miller, pale, and El Serpiente, a figure of calm, dangerous authority. She strode forward, her expression neutral. "I'm Dr. Thorne," she stated, her voice steady. El Serpiente turned to her. His dark eyes, which had intimidated hardened criminals and corrupt politicians alike, studied her with an unnerving intensity. "You saved my brother." "I treated a patient," Eris corrected, her gaze unwavering. "That is what I do," Harding immediately interjected. "You have no business here, Ramirez. Your brother is a material witness in a gang-related shooting, and he's under police custody." El Serpiente ignored him completely. He took another step towards Eris, his eyes still locked on hers. "They said you broke rules, put yourself in danger. For Leo." "My oath is to my patients," Eris replied, crossing her arms. "Not to rules, not to policy, not to fear." A long silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Harding bristled, ready to intervene, but even he seemed hesitant to cross El Serpiente in such a public, unexpected encounter. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched El Serpiente's lips. It wasn't a friendly smile, but one of profound understanding, even admiration. "A debt is owed," he stated, his voice quiet but resonant. "My brother's life. We take our debts seriously, Dr. Thorne." Harding scoffed. "Oh, I'm sure you do, Ramirez. More blood, more violence, that's your debt system." El Serpiente finally turned to Harding, and the detective visibly stiffened under his cold, venomous glare. "You speak of things you do not understand, detective. This is not a debt of blood. This is a debt of honor." He turned back to Eris. "You showed honor. You showed courage. You did what no one else would." He paused, then swept his gaze around the bustling ER, taking in the tired nurses, the anxious patients, the worn-out equipment. "This hospital," he announced, his voice now carrying across the entire waiting room, "is now neutral ground, safe harbor." A gasp rippled through the staff. Harding looked absolutely apoplectic. "What are you talking about, Ramirez?" Harding spat. "You think you can just declare a hospital neutral ground? This is a police matter, a city matter." El Serpiente's eyes glinted with icy amusement. "The city's matters often end up here, bleeding. My matters, detective, end tonight. From this moment, Street Jude's Community Hospital is under my protection. No colors, no business, no violence. Anyone who disrespects this place disrespects me. And my word is law on these streets." He held Eris's gaze one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the strange, unasked-for pact they had just forged. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and walked out of the ER, his retinue of quiet, watchful men melting away behind him. The silence he left in his wake was deafening. Everyone, staff, patients, police, stared at Eris as if she had just conjured a dragon. "Did you hear that?" Nurse Miller whispered, her eyes wide. "He just declared us safe." "Safe?" Harding roared, his face turning a furious shade of purple. "He just made this hospital a target. He's turning it into a gang clubhouse, Doctor. Thorne, do you have any idea what you've done?" Eris felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach, but also a strange sense of vindication. She had done her job. And now, in a twisted, unexpected way, that job might just have offered a lifeline to her struggling hospital. But Davies was going to lose his mind. True to form, Davies stormed into her makeshift office 15 minutes later, practically vibrating with fury. "Do you realize what this means, Dr. Thorne? The Vipers have declared our hospital. This is a public relations nightmare. We'll be associated with criminals. Our funding will be cut. Our donors will pull out. You have single-handedly destroyed the reputation of this institution." "Or," Eris countered, her voice calm despite her churning stomach, "I've made it the only place in this ward where people can get medical care without fear of getting shot." "That's absurd," Davies scoffed. "You think a criminal's word means anything? This is a temporary lull, a publicity stunt. When the rival gangs see this, they'll simply attack us more viciously to challenge the Vipers." "Then why did they retreat last night, Mr. Davies?" Eris asked pointedly. "Why haven't there been any reprisal shootings outside since El Serpiente's declaration? Maybe, just maybe, his word holds more weight on the streets than your board policies." Davies pounded his fist on her desk. "This is gross insubordination, Doctor. I will ensure your medical license is revoked. You have jeopardized every employee, every patient, and the very financial viability of Street Jude's. This is not just a suspension anymore. This is dismissal. You're fired. And who will staff your ER, Mr. Davies?" Eris shot back, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Who will do the work when you fire all the doctors who actually care more about patients than spreadsheets? You think anyone wants to work in a hospital where the administrator values a balance sheet over a human life?" Their argument was cut short by Detective Harding, who burst into the office, his face equally enraged. "I'm going to file a report, Dr. Thorne. You're interfering with a police investigation, fraternizing with known gang leaders, and creating an unacceptable risk to public safety. I'm going to make sure your name is mud in this city, and that you never practice medicine again." The rage bait was in full swing. The authorities, the administrators, the cynical forces of the city, they all saw Eris's purely humanitarian act as something dangerous, naive, or even criminal. They were unified in their intent to crush her, to punish her for daring to prioritize life over the rules. But Eris, despite the fear that gnawed at her, felt a resolve hardening inside her. They could threaten her, fire her, strip her of her license, but they couldn't strip her of her conscience. She had done the right thing, and now she would face the consequences, head on. The hospital might be safe by gang decree, but Eris Thorne's battle had only just begun. In the weeks that followed El Serpiente's declaration, an uneasy, almost surreal peace settled over Street Jude's community hospital. Mr. Davies, though still sputtering threats of legal action and dismissal, found his hands tied. The local news, initially drawn by the controversy of a gang leader protecting a hospital, had instead focused on the undeniable fact violence had decreased in the immediate vicinity of Street Jude's. Ambulance runs for gang-related shootings dropped. Families, once terrified to bring their children to the ER, now came with a cautious sense of relief. Eris Thorne, despite her official suspension, continued to work. She simply ignored Davies's memos and threats, and the hospital staff, having witnessed her courage, quietly followed her lead. Even some of the most cynical security guards now held a grudging respect for her. The ER, once a chaotic intersection of fear and desperation, now saw a strange new clientele. A viper with a broken hand sat patiently next to an iron crow with a nasty flu, separated by only a few feet and a palpable, unspoken tension, but remarkably no violence. Mothers in purple bandanas sat across from fathers in black and red, both waiting for their children to be seen, their shared concern for their loved ones eclipsing, for a fragile moment, the tribal hatreds of the streets. It was an unnerving, unprecedented truce, maintained by the unseen but omnipresent hand of El Serpiente. To the community, Eris was a hero. To Davies, she was a professional pariah, a ticking liability time bomb. To Detective Harding, she was a dangerously naive do-gooder at best, a gang collaborator at worst. He continued to harass her, making unannounced visits, asking pointed questions about Leo Valdez, who was now awake and recovering, still under police guard. "Still protecting your little friend, doctor?" Harding would sneer, leaning against the nurse's station. "Still doing my job, detective," Eris would calmly reply, signing off on a patient's discharge papers. "Perhaps you should try it sometime." The tension was a constant low thrum, a fragile string stretched to its breaking point. Everyone knew it couldn't last forever. The truce was a bizarre anomaly, and anomalies rarely endured in the harsh realities of the East Ward. The ultimate test arrived on a Tuesday, late in the evening. The sirens were different this time, a dozen of them, converging from all directions, piercing the night with a frantic urgency. The air outside crackled with the sound of rapid-fire automatic weapons, closer and more sustained than the previous incident. It wasn't a gang fight, it was a war zone. "Mass casualty incoming?" The dispatcher's voice blared over the ER intercom, laced with panic. "Police shootout, multiple GSWs, ETA, 3 minutes." Eris felt a cold dread in her stomach. "All hands on deck!" she yelled, instantly snapping into command mode. "Trauma bays 1 and 2 ready? Call all available surgeons, anesthesiologists. Miller, get the blood bank on alert. Tell them to send over every unit of O-neg they have." The first ambulance screeched to a halt, its doors flying open. Paramedics, their faces grim, wheeled out a gurney bearing a critically wounded man. His body was riddled with bullet holes, his clothes soaked in blood. As they transferred him to Trauma Bay 1, Eris's eyes widened in stunned recognition. It was Silas. Silas, the Serpent Monroe, leader of the Iron Crows. The very man who had led the attack that nearly killed Leo Valdez weeks ago. The Viper's mortal enemy. "Multiple GSWs, doctor," the paramedic gasped. "Chest, abdomen, extremities." He was in a firefight with a rival gang, then the police rolled up, caught in the crossfire. The irony was brutal, almost poetic. Eris, who had saved Leo, now faced the man who tried to kill him. Her personal feelings, however, were irrelevant. He was a patient, a human being in dire need. "Get him stripped. BP Pulse GCS," Eris barked, pushing aside the wave of recognition. "Miller, prep for immediate laparotomy and thoracotomy. Dr. Chen, get in here now." The ER transformed into a maelstrom of desperate activity. As Eris and her team worked to stabilize Silas, the external chaos only intensified. Outside, the streetlights painted a scene of utter pandemonium. Squad cars swarmed, their blue and red lights flashing wildly. Officers in tactical gear formed perimeters, and then, a sight that sent a shiver down Eris's spine, a phalanx of vipers, their purple bandanas stark against the night, began to gather. They were armed, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the hospital. The news of Silas Monroe's presence in Street Jude's had spread with terrifying speed. The hospital was about to become the epicenter of a conflict far greater than Eris could have ever imagined. Moments later, the ER doors burst open. It was Detective Harding, flanked by a dozen heavily armed SWAT officers. His face was a mask of fury and vindication. "Dr. Thorne!" he bellowed, his voice echoing in the crowded ER. "We're taking custody of Silas Monroe! He's a wanted man! Stand aside!" Behind him, Eris could see a figure pushing through the crowd of SWAT officers, El Serpiente, Marcus Ramirez. His face, usually so impassive, was now etched with a profound, terrifying conflict. His eyes, burning with a dangerous light, locked onto Eris, then on the door of Trauma Bay 1, where his mortal enemy lay dying. The air in the ER grew impossibly heavy. The threat of violence, once outside, was now inside, pressing in from all sides. "You cannot enter this Trauma Bay, detective," Eris declared, stepping in front of the door, her stance defiant. "He is critically unstable. Any movement, any stress, will kill him. And you will endanger every single patient and staff member in this ER by bringing an armed tactical team into a civilian hospital." Harding scoffed. "He's a criminal, doctor. He's fair game. You're protecting him again. And don't you see what's happening outside? Your little safe harbor is about to explode. Your Viper friends are here for revenge." Aris turned to El Serpiente, who stood a few feet away, his men silently fanning out behind him, their hands on their weapons. His eyes were fixed on the Trauma Bay. The raw, primal urge for vengeance warred with the strange, fragile promise he had made. Marcus, Eris said, using his first name, a desperate appeal to the man beneath the gang leader. You declared this hospital safe. For everyone. Silas is a patient here. He is not the Iron Crow leader right now. He is just a man, bleeding, dying. Your word, Marcus. Your honor. El Serpiente's jaw clenched. He looked from Eris to Harding, then to the growing crowd of his own men outside, their faces a mixture of bloodlust and confusion. At that moment, Mr. Davies appeared, pushing his way through the cluster of armed police. He was sweating profusely, his face pale with terror and a grim, calculating relief. Detective Harding, you have my full support. Take the man. Dr. Thorne, stand aside. Let them have him. Let this problem solve itself. He pointed a trembling finger at Eris. This is your chance, Doctor. Let him die. The Vipers will be appeased, the police will be satisfied, and we can finally be rid of this nightmare you've created. The sheer, unadulterated cynicism of Davies's words, his willingness to let a man die to save the hospital's reputation, filled Eris with a cold fury that eclipsed her fear. The rage bait was complete. Every authority figure, every institutional force was aligning against her, demanding she compromise her fundamental humanity. No, Eris stated, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the escalating tension. I will not. She planted her feet, her arms crossed, forming an unyielding barrier between Silas and the forces that sought to consume him. Detective Harding, you will not enter this trauma bay. Marcus, your word is absolute. Mr. Davies, if you want to watch a man die, you can do it yourself, but it won't be in my ER. Not while I draw breath. She was one woman, armed with nothing but her oath and her fierce, unyielding morality against a gang leader seeking vengeance, a police detective demanding justice, and an administrator prioritizing profit. The fate of Silas Monroe, and perhaps the fragile truce itself, hung in the balance. The air in the ER was so thick with unspoken threats and raw emotion that it felt like a physical weight. Detective Harding, his hand still resting on his holstered weapon, stared at Eris, then at El Serpiente, then back at Eris, his face a contorted mask of frustration and grudging realization. He knew, intuitively, that to physically remove Eris would be to ignite an even greater inferno. The optics would be catastrophic. Armed police assaulting a doctor in her ER, potentially contributing to a patient's death. El Serpiente's eyes, however, were the most telling. He looked at Eris, truly looked at her, her unwavering stance, her defiant gaze, her absolute refusal to bend. He saw not a naive idealist, but a woman of profound, unshakable conviction. He saw honor, an honor that, in its own way, mirrored his own twisted code. He looked at his men outside, then back at Silas's trauma bay. Vengeance was a powerful motivator, a sacred principle on the streets. But so was the word of El Serpiente, and he had given his word. He had declared Street Jude's safe harbor. A long, agonizing minute passed. Then, Marcus El Serpiente Ramirez did something that shocked everyone present. He lowered his gaze slightly, a subtle nod of respect. La doctora tiene razón, he said, his voice low but clear, carrying to his men outside. The doctor is right. Her house, her rules. He raised a hand, a gesture of command that instantly quelled the restless energy of his vipers. Stand down! No one enters! No violence! We wait. A collective murmur went through his men, but none dared to defy him. They slowly, reluctantly, lowered their weapons, remaining at a watchful distance. Harding stared, disbelief warring, with a flicker of something akin to awe. He had never seen a gang leader back down, let alone show such deference to a civilian, much less a doctor. The strange, fragile truce held. Eris let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned back to Harding, her gaze firm. He is critically unstable, detective. If you want him alive, he stays under my care. If you insist on taking him, he will die. And that will be on your conscience. Harding, seeing the Vipers holding their ground, seeing El Serpiente's unexpected show of restraint, knew he was cornered. He couldn't risk a full-scale firefight in a hospital. He couldn't be responsible for a patient's death by forced removal. The rage in his eyes faded, replaced by a grudging, reluctant respect. Fine, he grunted, his voice tight with frustration. We'll post guards. Perimeter. No one in, no one out without my say. So, but the moment he's stable enough to be moved, he's ours. Understood? Understood, Eris replied, knowing it was the best she could hope for. Davies, utterly deflated, stood by, his earlier bluster evaporated. His plan to let Silas die had failed. His attempts to control Eris had failed. He was a small, impotent man caught in a storm of moral integrity he couldn't comprehend. The rest of the night was a grueling marathon. Eris and her team, fueled by adrenaline and sheer determination, worked tirelessly on Silas. Doctor? Chen performed miracles, repairing lacerated organs, staunching the bleeding. As dawn approached, weary and splattered with blood, they finally stabilized him. Silas Monroe, leader of the Iron Crows, would live. His survival, however, brought a different kind of storm. The ensuing board review, instigated by Mr. Davies, was meant to be Eris's professional execution. Davies presented a damning case: gross insubordination, jeopardizing staff, collaborating with criminals, turning the hospital into a de facto gang sanctuary. Detective Harding, though less hostile than before, gave testimony detailing Eris's obstruction of justice. But then, an unexpected tide turned. The local news, having covered the incredible standoff at St. Jude's, had shifted its narrative. No longer was it just about gang violence. It was about a heroic doctor, community leaders, mothers from the East Ward, even some of the gang members whose families Eris had treated, flooded the hearing in her support. They spoke of the safety street Jude's now offered, the only place where their children could be treated without fear. They spoke of Eris Thorne, who saw only patients, not gang colors. The hospital board, faced with a potential public relations disaster of epic proportions if they fired their beloved community doctor, capitulated. After hours of tense deliberation, they voted to clear Dr. Thorne of all wrongdoing. Mr. Davies, instead, received a formal censure for his insensitivity and unprofessional conduct during the crisis. His career, though not ended, was permanently tainted. Weeks later, the rhythm of St. Jude's had settled into a new normal. Silas Monroe, after a long recovery, was transferred to a prison hospital. Leo Valdez, now discharged, faced his own legal battles but was alive. The intense police presence at St. Jude's had diminished, replaced by a more discreet, but still vigilant, watch. Eris Thorne, officially reinstated, stood at the nurse's station, signing off on charts. She glanced out at the waiting room. A young mother, wearing a subtle purple bandana in her hair, sat patiently, her child cradled in her arms. Across from her, an old man, whose grandson was a known Iron Crow, slowly read a newspaper. They weren't talking. They weren't acknowledging each other. But they were sharing the same space, in peace, in the unspoken understanding that within these walls, they were simply people seeking care. The world outside St. Jude's remained a brutal, violent place. The gangs still operated, the poverty still gnawed. The systemic issues that plagued the East Ward were far from solved. But Eris Thorne, with her unwavering moral compass, had carved out a small, fiercely protected sanctuary. She had proven that humanity, when uncompromisingly upheld, could, against all odds, create its own safe harbor. The fight, she knew, was far from over. But for now, St. Jude's was a beacon, and Eris Thorne, the doctor who dared to treat a wounded man during a gang fight, knew she was exactly where she needed to be.